All right, Robert. Robert and Hannah.
Hey. Wait, am I supposed to share the PowerPoint or something? Oh, wait, no, you have it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so you can present this while other stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's a really good PowerPoint. I think I spent like in 2 hours on this or something, and then I gave up.
Okay.
Kind of carried. Okay. So, I guess the resolution we're doing is the United States should adopt a declaratory nuclear policy of no first use, or at least that's the resolutionary text, right? But wait, can people actually hear me? I want to make sure like I'm not speaking into the void or something.
I
Yes.
can hear.
Okay. I guess when you're reading this resolution, there's something you should like think about, right? Or I guess like when you're reading any resolution, it's a good idea to understand what it's talking about first. So what does no first use actually mean, right? And I think I just pulled something off of Wikipedia here, but it's like it's a pledge or it's like a written statement by some nuclear power. So that's just like any country that has nuclear weapons. And the written statement says that they won't use nuclear weapons as a means of warfare unless they're first attacked with nuclear weapons. So in essence, this is just like they can't use nukes unless they get nuked first, like TLDR. What's a declaratory policy? It's just like a set of public statements about. It's just like people saying stuff. I pulled this from I think Google. A set of public statements about circumstances in which a state or group of states would consider using nuclear weapons. So it's just like, I think it's where a country just drafts a resolution and then they declare this and then that's it. Like there's no real legal binding force, I guess. Like there's no consequence if they violate the declaratory policy, or at least, yeah, there's like nothing. It doesn't really, yeah. It's of questionable effectiveness. Yeah. So I found this article, and this is just one example. There's probably more, but like during the Cold War, the USSR was like, oh, we have a no first use policy too. But the problem is like you can really easily say one thing, but then like do something completely different, right? So they told the United States that they had a no first use policy, but like after the war, they like looked at the documents and it was actually they were going to use nuclear weapons. And if you think about it, it's kind of suspicious, right? Like if a country like if the United States tells everyone, oh, we're not going to nuke you unless you nuke us back, like is North Korea really going to believe that? Like how strong is the United States word when it comes to something of this magnitude, right? Like I think using nuclear devices is probably pretty serious, and like we'll get to this more actually in the negation. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? Okay. I think Hannah wrote this part, so Hannah should probably talk here.
Wait, before we continue, just a little bit more background on like the resolution. So right now, the people who do have nukes, there's like only a couple countries. It's the US, China, Russia, France, UK, North Korea, India, Pakistan, and maybe Israel, because we're like maybe they have nukes, but we don't really know. And right now, the people who have said that they do have like a no first use policy, that's China and India. And then for like the rest of people, Russia, US, UK, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, they said it's like a defensive only policy. So like I'm not gonna nuke you unless you like attack me first. And like I mean it's only for like defensive uses. So like that's basically what it means. Okay, yeah. Let's go on.
Wait, do people have any questions? I feel like if we have questions about the resolution, we should answer them like first before we get onto the actual arguments. Yeah, if someone has questions, they should say something. That'd be pretty cool. Or maybe we're just like super good at teaching. I think that's it. Our explanations are perfect.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah, that's the only explanation. I guess we can move on. If you have like any questions, you can just like raise your hand or something.
Okay, so the app, I think for the app narrative, it should be really portraying the no first use policy as sort of a common sense policy, sort of like something that should exist, like just as a precaution. So basically, you're saying like nuclear weapons are very very dangerous, right? Like obviously you saw how nuclear war won the Impact Calc tournament, and there's like a reason, right? Because a lot of people are really scared of nuclear weapons and like the like sort of destruction that they cause, right? So nukes aren't really something you should be like messing around with. And the no first use agreement like sort of adds this extra layer of caution that is necessary when dealing with such a dangerous sort of weapon, right? Yeah, so I think in reality, this sort of comes into placing nuclear weapons like even further along as like a last resort thing, right? Like obviously, I think there's been a lot of people saying like nuclear weapons are like good to use when you're supposed to like end a war quickly with them, or like for example, ending World War II. But I think this just pushes nukes in their use even further away. Also, my internet is like super bad, so you should tell me if you like don't hear me say something. Also, a part of this narrative should be sort of like nukes aren't really useful for anything. Like, there's no reason why we would need to have a first strike in order to keep our nations like safe and secure, right? For example, a lot of deterrence and the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons is not predicated on our ability to strike nations, but rather our ability to have a second strike capability and strike back at nations if they were to nuke us, therefore ensuring mutually assured destruction. Hey, go back. Therefore ensuring mutually assured destruction. So stop laughing. Basically, I think the general idea here is like there's not really a real use for having a first strike capability for our nuclear weapons, but so there's like not a lot of benefits going on there, but in general it's probably a bad thing to have more instances of nuking other countries. So there's like a trade-off. Also, I think it's a really cool narrative, just like not exactly cool, but I think a lot of people would agree with it in just saying like the US has historically not made like good decisions with our military capabilities, right? Like for example, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, like every single war in the past 2 decades has been like an unmitigated disaster, right? Like the war on terrorism, like blah, 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 right? So since we're like our military leaders are evidently very incompetent, we should mitigate the amount of power that we concentrate in their hands. You can go to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So I think the argument that hits closest to home is this argument about deranged leaders, right? Like Trump right now, he's like crazy, right? He's like a maniac. You never know what he's gonna do. So who knows what he's gonna do next, right? So I remember like just across his reign of care, a lot of debate teams would run cases talking about how Trump was gonna like nuke a country or something to start a nuclear war for like various reasons, right? Also, there's a lot of literature just detailing how like easy it is for a president to nuke someone if they like feel like it, right? Like I think there's some articles detailing how it takes like 15 minutes from the start of your.
Closer to 5 minutes.
Okay, shut up. Okay, it's a very short amount of time from the. Shut up! I'm giving the presentation. Okay, so it takes a like very short amount of time for the president issuing the order, between the president issuing the order and the actual launch of a nuclear weapon. And what that means is that this could, one, lead to very bad decisions because the presidents make national security decisions based on like shitty intelligence, right? within that like short amount of time, there could be like very bad things happening there. But also, if we just have like a crazy leader, right, who like doesn't know what he's doing and just like wants to nuke something, like it's very easy for them to do it, right? So I think there are two like end of the day impacts out of this. Basically, nukes are very like nukes can cause extinction or nukes like wipe out something. But both of these implications like have thresholds to launching the nuke, right? Like if you go for this like it only wipes out like 1 million people thing, it makes it a lot more likely for a leader to actually press the nuclear button because the threshold is much smaller, right? Because there's not as much of a danger when you're nuking like, I don't know, Algeria or something, right? Like it's not like they have nukes or like are allied with anyone with nukes. So there's not really a mutually assured destruction threshold there. Also, I think this like hits close to home because like generally a lot of debate judges you'll get like generally agree that Trump is like crazy, right? So you never know like what kind of crazy leader we'll have in the future, but you do know that like our nuclear arsenals are probably going to get a lot more advanced and we're probably going to have a lot more power, right? So we should do whatever we can to like regulate the amount of power that these like potentially deranged people in power can have. Next slide. Yeah, miscalc. Okay, so I don't know, this is like kind of a silly argument now that I think about it, but it's basically like it can like add an extra level of safety, not from the US nuking other nations, but from other nations nuking us based on miscalc decisions, right? So I think like if you go on the internet, there'll be a lot of like instances where people are like 5 times the world almost ended or something like that, right? And basically what happened, okay, Troy, just calm down, okay? So basically if you go on the internet, there'll be a lot of like articles basically talking about how like nuclear miscalculation has almost happened before. And like by some measure of luck, the world hasn't ended yet, right? It's like, for example, I think I was like watching a very memorable debate round where basically like they were talking about like THAAD, where you can like shoot nukes out of the sky, this like weapon system. But basically they were talking about how like Russia almost nuked the US because they thought like some birds, like a flock of birds was like an incoming nuke, right? So they were about to press the nuke button. But it turns out it was just like some birds, right? So with a no first use policy, they could be reasonably assured that we wouldn't attack them first. So there wouldn't be an ability to miscalc on that aspect there. Next slide. Escalation. So basically, I think the general accepted use of nukes within national policy is to basically be a super huge show of power, right? Like its use generally in warfare is to like either deter actions of similar escalation scale level or to quickly end warfare, right? So for example, if we got stuck in a war with Iran or something, like Trump might pull out the nukes in order to end the war very quickly and pull the troops back out. Because it's nukes are sort of supposed to be used to exert like absolute dominance, right? So nukes were quickly used to end World War II because we like pulled them out and then Japan was like, shoot, we're screwed, right? But basically, the idea of that doctrine is the idea that the US is unmatched in our nuclear ability, right? But right now the US is like probably matched in nuclear ability because Russia and like China have a lot of nukes. So the idea here is that like our ability to end wars with nukes is no longer assured because other nations match us. So this doctrine is flawed, but the US government still abides by it. So therefore, if we were to, for example, end the Ukraine war, if we got involved in Ukraine and we like nuked Russia or something, or like someone associated with Russia, the war would not end. Rather, Russia would just pull out the nukes and nuke us back or nuke one of our allies. So the idea is that if we were to nuke first in any sort of instance, then it would lead to further escalation and potentially extinction.
Okay. Wait. Before we go to neg, there's also a couple more args for AF during camp that I heard. So basically another thing is it like reduces the risk of like nuclear proliferation and like a nuclear arms race, right? Because now that like, well, first of all, because like the US, now that they like signed on to like, you know, a no first use policy, or like they, you know, proclaimed it, it kind of like supports non-proliferation and like disarmament treaties. First, not like because the US, you know, obviously signed on. So some other countries might follow, people who are allies of the US, like perhaps France, I don't know. But also it reduces the risks of like, you know, nuclear proliferation, because like before countries want, like they want nukes, right? Because they're scared that like, okay, well, if I don't have nukes and you have nukes, you're gonna nuke me first. But so they want to like, you know, obviously have nukes to protect themselves. But you know, if you declare like, I'm not gonna nuke you unless you nuke me, then there's not really a reason for them to like need to develop nukes, because like now they know other people won't be nuking them first. So like they don't need that like capability to like, you know, like have a nuke in order to deter you, because you have promised that you won't nuke them for like no reason. So that like reduces the risk of like nuclear proliferation, which is really good, because that reduces like the risk of like, you know, nuclear arms race, which leads to a lot of like miscalculation and could potentially lead to like nuclear warfare, or at least like, you know, some form of conventional warfare.
Okay. Neg. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? I think the neg is a bit more nuanced than the AF. I think like when you're looking at this resolution, the AF is like what seems immediately like the obvious best answer, right? But yeah, I think the neg does have to do a bit more work. Like it's kind of complicated or weird. I think there's like some important things to establish first, or like as part of the narrative. Like in the AF case, you kind of want to make it like, I guess like, for example, the deranged leaders idea. It's like, oh, we can like randomly nuke people. But like if you think about it, like the chances of us nuking people is like kind of low, right? I think the chance of a nuclear strike is essentially zero at this point. Like even though we're all liberals and we hate Trump, like he's not that stupid, right? Like I don't think he's actually going to nuke people. And I don't know, it'd be like you should try to make that clear. Like the probability of a leader nuking someone is kind of low, especially because like they do have to confer with like military leaders first. Like it's not an arbitrary decision. They have to like hold a meeting, and like the military leaders, I think they have to agree or something, but they have to talk to him at least. Um, Another thing to realize is that like this no first strike thing doesn't actually do much, right? Like it's kind of just a country that says something, and that's it. Like it's just a country that declares, oh, we're not gonna nuke people. But like if you look at past examples, it's clearly not very effective, right? For example, Russia told us that they had a no first strike policy, but obviously that was a lie. And like at that point, do countries actually trust it? Like even if the US does say, oh, we have a no first strike policy, is North Korea really going to use that as the basis for like their political decisions? I think that's kind of questionable. I think this third sentence I wrote, I don't know, it's like kind of it's kind of bad, but it's okay. It's like this is kind of going into planned territory, but you could try to make the argument that we need time to transition, and like we should eventually have a no first use policy, but like we don't do it now, which is and you can just like find any arbitrary reason why we don't want to do it now. A good reason is actually our conventional military strength is kind of weak according to one study I found. So I don't know how like legitimate this is, but it's an idea. So you could make the argument that we should wait until we build up our conventional military to actually transition to a no first use policy. And I think the reason for that will be clear later. But this argument's like not super bad, because hopefully, assuming that Biden wins the presidency, I think if Biden wins, the neg will be significantly stronger because we don't have to deal with crap about Trump being like a deranged leader and stuff. And also, no first use is part of Biden's campaign pledge apparently. So you can make the argument that it would be established eventually, just like not right now, at like a more opportune time.
Yeah,
okay.
and that's like really good because it kind of like takes out like the Avs offense, or like you basically get their entire case for yourself. Like, yeah, it's good. Like you're just supporting my case, except the only reason why it's bad only happens in your world. So it's kind of like a trick, but
Yeah, I don't know how like legitimate this is. It's kind of cheesy, but I guess the main reason why we like most of the literature for why we don't want to know first use policy is deterrence, and I think this is kind of legitimate actually. Um, the idea is we want the ability to use nuclear devices in order to deter conventional warfare. So there's this one study by Rand in 2016. So I don't know how like up to date this is, but it basically says that NATO, NATO can't defend its like some of its members. I think the reasoning behind that is because America doesn't put enough investment, or not America, but like NATO doesn't put enough investment into its conventional military strength. I don't know like how legitimate this is because I think there's a general perception that like the U.S. spends a lot on its military. So I don't know like how compelling this argument is, but you could probably find some more stuff. But the idea here is that we can use nuclear devices, or we can use the threat of nuclear devices to prevent conventional attacks. So, for example, during the Cold War, um, the Soviet Union didn't really invade Western Europe, even though it had like very limited defenses. I think one reason for that might be because it knows if it did invade Western Europe, it could provoke an escalation, right? And that escalation could cause the use of nuclear devices, which would lead to mutually assured destruction. So the Soviet Union didn't really want that, right? Which is, I guess, the deterrence factor of nuclear devices. Like just having the threat of them, like having the threat of nuclear devices can be effective to stop not just like nuclear threats, but also other forms of threats, like for example, biological weapons, which could be like pretty bad too, or just like conventional warfare, like if Russia decided to invade some other place.
yeah, and like kind of adding on to what Robert said. So like kind of like, chemical, biological, or like I don't know, a cyber attack that like shuts down the electric grid. Like it has like a huge impact, right? It probably kills as much people as a nuke does, but because of like the no first use policy, you can't use a nuke, right? So like that kind of like removes the deterrence for people to like launch those kinds of attacks against us. They're like, okay, well they can't nuke us, so we might as well use these kinds of warfare instead.
Oh yeah, I think this is like the truest argument. So deterrence is like kind of questionable. But this is kind of complicated, I think. Um, this is true in that like a lot of countries um, see no first use as like really bad, or yeah, they see it as like a weakening of the US's support of them. Um, and this is true in like a lot of US allies. So for example, countries like South Korea, I found this news article, says they're like actively pushing for the reintroduction of US weapons. And there was another quote from Japan, which I think they called no first use unacceptable, but I can't find it. But Japan is also like very against no first use. And like in 2016, when Obama tried to do no first use, US allies like across the world lobbied really heavily against this move. So I think there's definitely some truth here, right? I think you could actually work with the idea. You could have this at like concurrently with the narrative that no first use doesn't do anything, because you could say like even though no first use has very little impact, the perception it has on our allies is really big. I think that's probably like the closest thing to truth we have for this resolution, at least what I think is truth right now. Um, yeah, and this is a bad thing because um, when allies perceive a decrease in U.S. support for them, they have to like increase military spending in order to account for that, right? So, for example, there might be increased nuclear proliferation as a result of a perceived decreased U.S. support, or there could just be like more military spending in general. And there was this one card that says, yeah, military spending decreases social spending,
Social
whatnot.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
you could pull that in if you wanted. And like honestly for this, I think the link is like decently clear. Like just blame it on conservatives, right? Like we live in Washington, we're pretty liberal. Just blame it on conservative blocs and say they'll use it as an excuse to militarize. And I think that would be decently compelling, actually.
Okay. Okay. Wait.
Oh, shoot.
So
I
a
thought-
couple more ideas for neg. There's also like okay, so like right now, like the US is like super unclear about like when we use nukes, right? Like we don't say anything about like what instances we would use nukes or what instances we wouldn't use nukes under. So we're like really ambiguous, right? And like it's like kind of a strategic position for like it's like a policy of like strategic ambiguity, right? Like you don't know what I'm gonna do in response to like what you do to me. So you're probably gonna like stay on the safe side to like not risk being nuked, right? But when we like declare that like we're not gonna use it, like the no force use policy, it kind of eliminates that ambiguity. So people are like, okay, well I know exactly what you're gonna respond to, so I'm gonna do all these things and I'm gonna like try to push the line because now I know that you won't use a nuke, right? And this also kind of spills over into a second argument, which is that nuclear threats deter conventional attacks, right? It kind of ties into deterrence too, but it's kind of like there's a lot of like flashpoints for conflicts right now, like where tensions are like super high. And, when like the US doesn't have nukes, or like, we say we aren't going to like use nukes, they could, like go into conventional warfare in some of those flashpoints because they know like right now with like elections coming up and well, I mean, I guess elections will be over, but like Biden probably doesn't want to like send a bunch of troops out and like, like conventional warfare is like super expensive, whereas like pressing a nuke is like relatively cheap compared to, and it's like probably easier. So, without the option of a nuke, they're thinking that like, okay, well, the US probably wouldn't send conventional military in to prevent our attacks, so we can invade this area or we can like start a war in this area. And that would be bad, obviously, because a bunch of people die. Yeah. Okay, and one more thing. So for the impacts for like nuclear war, there's a lot of like nuclear flashpoints, which is like basically places where like nuclear war could happen, right? And it's like the Baltic states are like a really big one. So they're basically like states that countries that like border Russia, and they're NATO states, but Russia believes that like they belong to Russia because they used to be part of like the USSR, right? So like Russia wants to take over these like states, but like obviously it's part of NATO. So like if Russia were to like come in, we'd probably like defend them through like the NATO treaty, and that lead to a big war, and that'd be bad. And these are just like for impacts on both sides. You could use these either side. The second nuclear scenario is South China Sea, and basically it's like China wants to expand into like the South China Sea, places like Taiwan, and if the U.S. doesn't, if the U.S. declares a like no first use policy, China might become more aggressive in those areas. And especially because China also has a no first use policy. So if we were like, okay, we also don't have no first use policy, that could like, they're like, okay, well, there's no mutually assured destruction because you're not going to go to nuke war. So like we might as well just go to like conventional war, and I'm going to take over Taiwan, and that'd be bad in the South China Sea because that's
Actually, China's had
bad.
a first use policy
But
fully ever since they found nukes.
yeah, they have a no first use policy. That's what I said. But okay. And then third is an Iran initiated proxy war. Like Iran attacks Israel or Saudi Arabia. That'd be pretty bad. Or an attack on US soil, which is very unlikely, but you never know. They could just nuke us. Okay. Now let's talk about the tournament. Okay. I think if you haven't already yet, in the chat a long time ago, at like the top, I sent a tiny URL link, and if you went to the tournament and you still haven't filled this survey out, please do that right now. Just like really quick so we can use this in the future. Talking about the tournament, for people who didn't go to the tournament, this is like just general weighing information. So like, you know, it's just like feedback after tournament experience. Let's talk about real versus fake weighing. And I saw like a lot of fake weighing in like the tournament. Pretty sure the other judges have too. Semis was especially sad. But let's talk about fake weighing. Okay, like what is fake weighing, right? Like there's a lot of different ways to do fake weighing, but I think one of the biggest ways where people do fake weighing is they say, okay, we win on magnitude or time frame or like probability or like, you know, reversibility, and then they just say that, like they just say like we win this, and they don't explain why, right? Like, okay, so why do you win on reversibility? Like you have to actually do the comparison between your impact and their impact and saying why you win the link into, you know, reversibility, or why you are winning on magnitude, right? Like I think magnitude is easy to explain. Things like probability and time frame will probably be harder to explain. But then even after you do say that we do win on like magnitude time frame, right? For example, like some people have said like, okay, I win on time frame because my impact happens immediately, whereas your impact, you know, happens slowly over time. So I'm winning on time frame, so you should vote for me. Like why do I care that you are doing this faster than I am, right? Like, why does it matter that your impact happens faster if it's like, you know, sure, 1 million people die in 1 second in your world, but 1 million people die over 2 years in my world, right? Like, so what is the difference if it's still 1 million people? Why does it actually matter that your impact happens faster? That's like the piece of warranting that we're like missing in this, like, you know, transitioning from like fake weighing to real weighing. There's also like the other kind of fake weighing that is really big is like outweighing on like solvency, right? Like basically you just say like, oh, well, I'm winning my argument and they're not winning their argument because I like, you know, respond, like I delink them like 5 times. So like I win my argument and they didn't win their argument, so I win. Like that's not even weighing. You're just saying you're winning. Like that's the point of debate. That's not like weighing, right? Like weighing is where you take both impacts at like face value and you say, okay, even if they do win their impact, let's look comparing at like nuclear war versus like a global recession, right? Like which one, like that's real weighing by taking both impacts. And also not only like you don't solve at all, but also like I solve a little bit better for my impact than you solve for your impact. For example, like I solve for 90% of people in poverty while you only solve for 70% of wars or something, right? Or like you don't solve completely for all wars and I solve completely for all like poverty. Like that isn't a way, like a real weighing either. Third is on like clarity of link. We aren't doing this a lot, which is a good thing, but like this might come up as you go in like the national like circuit, right? So it's basically like how well you extended stuff, right? Like we talk about like you have to extend your impact and your link and your warrant in like summary and final focus, right? And like some people use this and say like, okay, they didn't extend their impact, so don't vote off of it. On clarity of link, we're winning. Like that's not really a way of weighing, right? Like that's also just saying like they don't win their impact. But you know, you don't have to use this to weigh, but you can like point it out to like tech judges, be like, okay, they literally didn't extend their link or their impact in summary, so you shouldn't vote off of it, right? Like you can tell that when you have a tech judge who like explicitly says you should be extending, like that would be useful to tell them, but just don't make it like you're doing some like real weighing. Like just say they don't extend it, so you shouldn't vote off of it. And then the fourth one is on urgency, which kind of ties into like time frame, right? It's like, why does urgency matter? Because basically urgency is kind of like, okay, well, my impact is happening in this quo, so we really need to solve this. Like, okay, but like their impact also happens. Like, okay, so like you have 1 million people dying right now versus 1 million people who are going to die in 5 years. Like, why does that actually matter, right? Like, it's kind of like fake weighing. So those are some like fake weighing that people do. Anyone have any questions?
Could I just add something to the urgency claim?
Yeah.
Yeah, so on the urgency claim, I think that people, at least with these fake weighing methods, especially with urgency, people tie these type of fake weighing methods into make their weighing more compelling towards their side. So while it's not like a good idea to use these as a way to win your point just based on comparing yours with your opponents, you can use things like urgency to make a more compelling case for why on magnitude yours is more important to be solved first. Like if there's a massive disaster happening in your case and it's 100,000 people dying and theirs is 1 million people in 10 years, you can say, well, on urgency, you can solve my impact much faster right now. And so even though in the long run, it's more people dying overall, it's like, or sorry, if there's 100,000 people dying tomorrow versus 100,000 people dying in 10 years, you can say that on urgency and on magnitude, we win. It's, you can use both of those.
Yeah, and like, but like obviously you can also hear like the flaw in that logic, right? Like, okay, so like what is the difference between 100,000 people now and then? And I think that's where like the next layer of analysis has to come in when you're talking about urgency, and we can like talk about that later. But it looks like intervening actors, it looks like the future is always like changing. We don't know what's happening, but we know the things that are happening right now are like happening, and if you can prevent them, you should like prioritize that. Like, for example, right, if we know like 100,000 people are dying due to like racism, but you know, they have like some sketchy link chain that says like if we don't innovate medications, like 100,000 people will die in like 10 years, right? So you have to say like, okay, well, we can't like deny the people living right now a chance to like be saved in order to like save some kind of potential future lives, right? Because like the status quo and things that are happening right now, it's probably a lot more clear than like things that are happening in the future that could be impacted by different things. So urgency is an option, but I don't think you should call it urgency. I don't know. Okay, let's talk about real weighing. Just a short overview, because I'm pretty sure last time we talked about all of this in our rooms. First is on magnitude. Severity is how bad it is, the number of people you affect, and then scope is like, you know, across the world, how many people. Second is time frame. The first is like long-term versus short-term, like how long does this last, right? The second is what happens first. So this can like prereq their argument. Like my argument happens first, like extinction happens. So it doesn't matter if we're solving for a recession because everyone's dead. So like the economy doesn't even matter. The third is like reversibility, like, oh, if you die, you die. But if you go into poverty or like the economy goes down, like it can always come back up. The fourth is the root cause or a link in. I don't really know where to put this, but like, oh, we link into your impact, or like my impact is the root cause of your impact. So we have to solve for me first before we solve for you. It's kind of like a prereq and also a link in. And it doesn't necessarily have to like link into your opponent's impacts, right? You can just do like, you know, for example, if your opponents have like the economy goes down and yours is like poverty, right? And these aren't like necessarily related. You can say like, oh, poverty is the root cause of like terrorism and like wars, and like terrorism and wars kill a lot of people. So like, you know, poverty, if we can solve for poverty, then we solve for terrorism and wars, and all of those three impacts, they outweigh, you know, just the economy. So that's another way you can implicate your impacts. But then third is on probability. So it's like how likely something is. First is like the inherent probability of something, you know, like obviously the link chain from like Trump becoming president again towards like all the way to like nuke war to the point of extinction. The inherent probability of that is very small versus like if Trump got elected, he'd deport people, which is like, you know, a straightforward link chain. The inherent probability is pretty high. And then the second kind of probability is like how well something was debated, right? Like, oh, they basically conceded my contention, or like this contention's really clean because like I like, you know, defended it against all their rebuttals. So the probability also does come from like a perception of what the judge has for your argument as the debate goes. So the next step after, you know, knowing all of these buzzwords like severity, time frame, reversibility, is to actually explain or warrant why you win this weighing mechanism, right? Like you can't just say I'm winning on time frame, let's move on. Like no, you have to say like why you are winning on time frame. Like I'm winning on time frame because my impact like lasts a lifetime, or it multiplies over time, while theirs is only short term. Or like, for magnitude, you have to at least say like, oh, you have to give your number and you have to give their number and say, I'm winning on magnitude. You can't just be like, I'm winning on magnitude. Like the judge might not necessarily know which arguments you're referring to as to which magnitude you're winning, right? So that's why you have to bring it back up. And then finally, you have to explain why win mechanism matters, right? Like we talked about fake weighing, where you just say, I win on time frame, so you should vote for me. Like that's not a reason to vote for you. You have to say, why does it matter if your impact happens first? Why does it matter if your impact kills 1 million people this year versus 1 million over 5 years, right? Magnitude weighing is pretty straightforward. Like you're like, okay, prefer like, the most lives. We save 100,000, they save 10,000, prefer us. But then you also have, weighing as to why you winning probability matters more than them winning magnitude, right? Like, so that's like meta weighing, which is like comparing the different weighing mechanisms and explaining why one matters more than the other. So let's answer some of these questions. Why do you think probability matters more than magnitude? Can someone give me an answer? Anyone? No one? How about Sabine? Why do you think probability matters more than magnitude?
Wait, give me 1 minute.
Wait,
Because if something
I
happens,
Okay, who has an answer?
me.
I have an answer.
Okay, why don't we let Vishnu go, and Troy, you can answer the next one.
Probability matters more than magnitude because even if something's going to damage people on a large scale, if it's basically not going to happen, that's not relevant. But whereas if there's like this relatively minor occurrence which kills like maybe a much fewer people, but there's a 100% chance of it happening, we should obviously look over that because of the fact that it's a large consideration and will most likely occur.
Exactly. Troy, did you have something to add on to that?
Yeah, I just said like if there's an earthquake that might kill 1,000 people, that like if there's an earthquake that might happen that'll kill 1,000 people, and like a rainstorm that, like, I don't know, a monsoon that's going to kill like 900 people, but the monsoon is definitely going to happen and the earthquake just might happen. You probably want to prioritize like running away from the monsoon instead of like evacuating the earthquake area. Like,
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, and then why does your long time frame outweigh their bigger short-term impact? For example, if you have like, a lifetime of like suffering because like, I don't know, you have like nuclear radiation which affects you for the rest of your life. Like, why does that outweigh like 100 people dying in the short term? Or for example, like, why does like decreasing GDP by like 2% every year matter more than like a recession right now?
because like if it's over a longer time frame, there's more suffering, and in turn that just probably reflects that like if there's like a prolonged like period of time per prolonged time frame, it becomes more of a chronic condition. And that's just worse because like you can't get rid of it. There's no like really recovery from something that happens over and over and over again every year.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else have an answer? No. Okay. So another reason why perhaps is like when we think about like, short-term impacts, like, okay, we can like help 100 million people, but then you think of like the long-term impacts, for example, like medical innovation goes down. So like you're losing 10,000 lives every year because you're decreasing the amount of drugs by, 5 or something that are invented, right? Like, sure, like you have a bigger short-term impact, but like over time, my long-term impact outweighs because when we're considering the effects, like every year, it's like compounding, right? Like there's more and more people who are being hurt every single year by my impact versus yours. Like it's just short, it happens once, but my impact is continuous and it happens for a very, very long time, which is like problematic. Okay. And then the final one, why does magnitude outweigh probability? Anyone have an answer? Sabine, are you ready for this?
Sure. So magnitude outweighs probability because you have 100% chance of breathing, but that's not necessarily an impact that we should concern ourselves with. If we always prefer probability, then we may never be able to combat serious issues because we won't be able to deal with the idea of those issues. Humans are already have a preconceived bias against large scale impacts because they can't actually comprehend the like scale and the actual scope of those impacts. So we should prioritize focusing on things of high magnitude to ensure that they don't happen, because otherwise we'll like always be thinking about small things that have a 100% chance of happening without having an idea of the bigger picture.
Exactly. That was such a great. Look at Sabine go. Yeah, and also things like, like extinction is such a big impact that we shouldn't even be trying to risk it at all.
Also,
Like even
I'm gonna add something.
okay, Hannah.
Nicole, let me add something.
At what? What? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I saw this in a round, but basically, some people like a team read weighing, which is basically because humans like subconsciously like already give probability such a higher weight than magnitude, because magnitude is dependent on like sort of context, right? So in America, a lot of things seem low probability, like high magnitude but low probability, but in reality, we're underestimating the probability of these like high magnitude things, right? Like for example, nuclear war seems like a pipe dream in the United States, but in Indo-Pac it seems very real. And since we're underestimating these like the like basically scale of these high magnitude impacts, we should give them extra weight within our heads in order to account for that and make realistic decisions.
Yeah. Or you can just say like probability is flawed, so just look to magnitude. But yeah, as I was saying, like you don't want to like risk even increasing the chance of extinction by 1% because it's like such a big and infinite impact. Okay, the next slide is a quick drill. And is Jerry here? Jerry?
I'm here.
Yes. Okay, since Jerry won the tournament, he'll defend Nuke War, and everyone else will weigh the impact of either, you can choose either eradicating racism or you can choose climate change, and you weigh that against nuclear war. And let's say like both well, we know that both sides like their impacts are happening, right? Like so nuke war is going on in Jerry's world, but we are 100% eradicating racism and 100% eradicating climate change. So does anyone want to volunteer to go first?
I can do
What do
climate.
What do you
Okay.
mean by both sides won their impacts? Like, is it as in 100% probability?
No. Like
Okay,
like
that-
your
that-
impact
that's too
happens.
unfair.
Like
Huh?
your nuke war happens. Like nuke war is happening. That's what it means.
Okay.
Like the thing,
Okay.
but not necessarily the impact of your impact. But yeah, okay, let's go, Vishnu. Let's hear your weighing change against nuke war.
So should he first read his impacts?
No. Like you don't need to read impacts, right? Like let's just, you can like think of whatever impact you want from climate change. You could probably weigh like your climate change impacts against his.
Wait, also I can only defend for like 10 minutes because I have to leave at like 4:35.
That's
But
fine.
I'll do what I can. Okay.
Okay. So I'll begin.
Okay,
First, time frame, because as I said earlier, the world's oxygen will be depleted by 50 to 80% due to the deaths of these coral reefs, since they are vital to the ocean ecosystem. However, nuclear wars, although they would cause severe harm on the Earth, they would not be guaranteed to reach everyone. So we win on magnitude. Next, we win on severity, because in many people, when they get hit by nuke war, they'll just die instantly. Versus if there's a depletion in oxygen in the atmosphere, it'll be a slower, more painful death. Next, we went on time frame, because we've already seen the impacts of climate change, and the loss of oxygen in the atmosphere will happen soon. And actually, we went on probability, because it has been proven that these coral reefs, when they deplete, they'll harm the ocean ecosystem, and there's going to be a lot higher of a probability for disaster than nuke war.
Okay. Wait, can I rebut any of his impacts?
No.
Okay.
You just have to weigh. Like, pretend so you have to weigh the impacts at face value, right? Like, that's what we talked about.
Okay.
Real impact, real weighing, not fake weighing.
Okay. All right. Can you give me like 30 seconds, or do I have to go now?
Go right away.
Okay. So first of all, we went on magnitude because looking at historical evidence in World War I, we can see that because of a complex network of alliances and grudges, a nuclear war between two states can easily spread to a global nuclear war, which means that the impact from this would be extinction. So thus we win this impact. We also win on reversibility, because while climate change happens over a long period of time and thus has a chance of being reversed, if a global nuclear war happens, then it's not really reversible, because there are ways to reverse climate change, including space colonization and alternate ways to get oxygen. So we win on reversibility there. We win on scope, because while some places who have the technology can develop space colonization and alternate ways to develop oxygen, a nuclear war that affects countries around the world, there's nowhere that's safe from the nuclear war itself or from the radiation from the nuclear war. And finally, did I miss anything? I forgot time frame. I forgot. Wait.
Okay.
Did I already say time frame, or did I miss that? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to what I was saying.
I think you did not.
Okay. And finally, we win on time frame because, again, due to the immediate nature of nuclear war. Time frame because what?
It's okay. Like, you don't have to go over all of them.
Okay, I'll just go over those 3 points. All
Yeah.
right, and we win. That was horrible.
Do any of the coaches have feedback?
You could tell too, Jerry.
Yeah.
Ishan, Sabine, do you guys have any feedback for that? They ain't listening, are they? Okay, here, I'll give my feedback.
I am listening though.
Okay, Sabine, do you have feedback?
There could have been more meta weighing.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, exactly what Sabine said. There's more meta weighing, because I mean everyone is like, I have winning on like 5 different, mechanisms, but you don't tell me which one to prioritize, right? Like, okay, sure, maybe I'll give you this one, but why does that matter more than like probability, right? So I think you have to like say, okay, why does the magnitude of nuke war completely outweigh how probable the impact is, right? Like, so why should we only look at magnitude and not look towards like probability, which I think Vishnu is probably winning here. So you do need to respond to that if you wanted to, and like both sides probably should have been like meta weighing. Okay. Does anyone else want to try this? What about Kathy?
Is Kathy here?
Yeah, she's right there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Wait, your name doesn't appear on the
Do I
participants.
have to go, Nicole?
Oh, do you not want to go?
You know what? I'll go.
Beautiful. Do you want climate change or eradicating racism?
I'll do climate change.
Sure.
Alrighty. Okay, how much time do we have?
Like, just do it kind of like short, like just how much ever time you need, but don't like go off, you know.
I'll just do a stopwatch for like around a minute or whatever.
Okay.
All right, wait, who's going first?
We can make Jerry go first. Come on, Jerry.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, we win on magnitude because a global nuclear war has the chance to eradicate the entire human population. Thus the magnitude here is extinction, which should be the largest impact in this round because first of all, it's unreversible. And second of all, the magnitude is infinite. So no reversibility, no magnitude, and the scope is also infinite. Okay. So by these three categories, extinction should be the largest impact in this round. Okay, and we have the magnitude, we have the potential magnitude of extinction, so thus we win on magnitude. We win on scope because a global nuclear war is exactly what it sounds like, a global nuclear war. Okay, and even if it just starts out as a war between two states, due to the complex web of alliances and grudges between different countries, a two-state nuclear war can quickly evolve into a global nuclear war. So thus we win on scope. We also win on reversibility because while other impacts like climate change can be reversed, a global nuclear war, if it happens, is unreversible because extinction, which is the biggest impact in this round, and which is our magnitude, is unreversible. So thus we win on reversibility. Okay, and we also win on time frame because time frame is a key factor to reversibility. And as our event happens immediately, thus we win on time frame. Okay, and the biggest weighing category in this round should be reversibility because depending on reversibility, the impacts of the events in this round could possibly be inexistent. It could be reversed. So if there's reversibility, if we win on reversibility, take that to be if anyone wins on reversibility, then that person should win this round. Okay.
All right, Roger. Okay, so I'm gonna start now. Let's begin with the first impact, which is magnitude. So when Jerry talks about the impacts of his nuclear war, and he says that it's going to affect everyone and it's going to possibly cause extinction. It's the same thing for climate change. In fact, even more so. If you tie this into time frame, what happens with the nuclear wars is eventually the impacts of it will get better. However, climate change will continually get worse as we progress. Take the example of Japan. When they were bombed in World War II by a nuclear bomb, they're getting better. It's not like everyone in there is now extinct. Whereas with climate change, we can see the effects slowly progressing worse and worse year after year, meaning that we win on the impact of time frame. Next, let's look on the point on scope. Now, Jerry talks about how alliances make that everyone gets involved in nuclear wars. However, many countries don't even have nukes, whereas everyone lives on Earth, and climate change would affect everyone on this planet, meaning that we affect the entire population, not just many people in the countries that have nukes. Now, let's move on to the point about reversibility. Now, we win on his framework because the nuclear war, as I said previously, the impacts can be reversed over time as we'll get better. However, with climate change, you're just going to get worse and worse year after year, and climate change isn't something that can be reversed. The only point that he could make is like we move to Mars, but that's not solving anything. That's just escaping it. Whereas with nuclear war, we'll at least be getting better sooner or later than climate change. That's time.
Yeah, that was really good. Okay, does anyone have feedback? Ishan, Sabine, feedback?
Yeah, just one point of feedback. Kathy, your speech was really good about climate change. It was super compelling. I think one thing that you can do to strengthen your point against nuclear war is to point out that even if a nuclear war occurs, his main impact is just harming the environment, which is the same thing as your impact.
Okay.
Now, he talks about extinction a lot, but as you brought up, extinction or death is a factor. And I think one other thing you can point out about climate change that's unlike nuclear war is that there's lots of countries around the world, or actually you did point out, that wouldn't be affected by a nuclear war, like Australia, New Zealand, and probably others. But climate change affects a larger magnitude of people. So I think if you just do more specific weighing on that, like that's the reason that people aren't really worried about nuclear war right now in comparison with climate change.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
I kind of that the fact that
God.
other countries don't have nuclear wars, that was a pretty good point. Surprised no one used it in the round.
Okay. How about Sabine? Do you have any feedback?
Not really.
Well, I think for Kathy, that was like a really good point. What I would say is probably still more meta weighing. Like you do win under his reversibility, like kind of, but I'm not really seeing like the comparative analysis, right? Because if we're doing real weighing, we would just take his impact of extinction and we would compare it to your impacts of climate change. Like we're taking things at face value. And extinction is irreversible and climate change is irreversible. So like both of them are like there isn't an amount of like irreversibility that like differs between the two, right? So I think the easier way for you to go is do some meta weighing, just say like, okay, we're both impacting to extinction, obviously. So the only thing that really matters is who has more probability, right? And obviously you're probably going to be winning on probability because like it's a really high chance that I mean climate change is like global warming. Like the definition is literally it goes around the world and it kills everyone. But nuke war could just happen like you say in a couple countries, right? It might not necessarily cause extinction due to, you know, intervening actors or whatever. So like I'm winning on probability. And I think the meta weighing you do there is just like enough.
Okay, I think Troy and I have to leave now, so thanks for the meeting. I'll see you on next Wednesday.
Could I add one more thing, Nicole?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, even if climate change happened right now, which it is, the point is that if a nuclear war happened, which was Troy's impact, I think, I don't know how much, but probably like 90%, 95%, if your extinction impact occurs, 90 or 95% of the population would be gone. And at that point, since 2030 is a point of irreversibility, I think climate change would basically be solved by human extinction. And so, I mean, you solve for their impact through nuclear war. So, you know, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, you could do some interesting weighing on that.
Sean is we don't talk about that argument anyways. Yeah, so I think just more meta weighing, and really you can say like Troy like tries to do meta weighing. He's like reversibility is the most important thing, but he like doesn't really warrant it, right? Like he doesn't really do the comparative warrant between like, okay, why is reversibility more important than like, you know, magnitude, for example? Like why is one person's 100% chance of death more important than like a billion people being pushed into poverty, right? Like we don't really know, and there's really no warrant there. So you can say like he gives no warrant, instead prefer probability over reversibility because we're like impacting to the same thing. Or you can say like the probability matters more because like sure your impact is like irreversible, but if it doesn't happen, it like doesn't really matter, right? Okay. So, does anyone else want to go before we move on? I'll assume that's a no. If anyone did, I would be doing nuke war probably. Okay, so these are the answers to the meta weighing questions, right? So these are just like kind of what we talked about, expanding on those ideas. So why does probability matter the most when you're doing meta weighing, right? Kind of like what Sabine said, you know, decision making is probably actually, she said the other way. So, well, okay, decision making is probably impossible if you keep thinking about like the worst case scenarios. It leads to like policy paralysis, right? No one would ever do anything. So that's why you should look to like the most probable impacts instead of looking to things like, like nuclear war. Like, there's always going to be a chance of nuclear war if we do anything different from the status quo. But like, are we really going to be worried about like a 0.1% increase in nuclear war when there's impacts like violence, structural violence going on, right? Like, and then the
Yeah,
second
to
reason,
add on to that though, like I think it's really compelling to just kind of think about it as like literally stepping outside and like breathing could potentially be like construed through some really obscure link chain to like lead to extinction. We would literally never be able to do anything if we prioritize magnitude over probability.
yeah, exactly. And you could say like real policy weighing. I mean, real policy making is not calculating like how much would this increase the chance of nuke war, right? It's probably like, especially for things that are like completely unrelated, um, like healthcare. Like they probably aren't thinking about the chance that it increases nuke war, but they probably are thinking about like the chances that it helps poor people in America who can't afford healthcare. The second reason is structural impacts like, racism and structural violence are ignored compared to like big magnitude impacts because it's like below the radar, right? Like it's on a small amount of people, obviously, because like you're impacting minorities. And it's not always like surface level obvious, like nuke war equals extinction, right? Like these are like people are being hurt and they're pushed into poverty and stuff. And you might not have the highest magnitude, but you probably do have a higher number of probability. So if we all like just went high on like magnitude, like we just ignored these like smaller impacts, right? And like these small impacts are not only important because like they're being ignored and because they're like hurting minorities, but because like these impacts like grow exponentially over time, right? Like not only do these minority populations grow and like the impacts like their entire like all of their generations, but like it gets harder and harder to solve probably as time goes on. So like that's why it's exponential. Like we talked about how like racism impacts are like exponential, but I don't want people just to be throwing like the magnitude of like racism is exponential. Like that makes no sense when you just say that, right? Like so you obviously have to have some warranting behind that. um okay, and then we can talk about why magnitude matters the most, right? Function of the size of the impact. Okay, that doesn't make sense, but like it's just like it's such a big number, right? Like we should prioritize this first. It kind of ties into like the second one, like makes other weighing mechanisms irrelevant. Like if everyone dies, then there's no point to doing anything, right? Like if a third of the US population dies, that probably causes the economy to collapse anyways, right? Stuff like that. So when a bunch of people die, it makes other impacts irrelevant. And like Sabine was talking about, psychological bias about against worst case scenarios. Like war is like probably unlikely in the US, but war is very likely in Middle Eastern countries where there's a lot of conflict. So like obviously we don't think about those kind of things, but people in other countries are. Fourth is reversibility, which can also be under time frame. Small impacts that are reversible, like poverty, don't matter as much as nuke war, despite the probability, because like you can reverse poverty anyways, but nuke war happening is irreversible, right? That's why reversibility comes before probability. Okay. Yeah, and the last one is time frame. So which impact happens first, right? Like time frame matters first because I can like link into their impact, or I also cause their impact. Second is prerequisite. If I prereq your case, like obviously the prereq is the most important thing to be talking about. The third is intervening actors. So like this is the most important thing because there's other solutions for you, right? But there's no solutions for the people who are dying right now. And that's why time frame is the most important thing, just based off of intervening actors. Okay, but then let's talk about if we have the same impact, right? Because, Kathy was kind of going into this territory, like climate change causes extinction, just like nuke war causes extinction for Jerry, right? So when you do have the same impact, you're going to do link weighing. And there's like no really set norms for this, but you can do like uniqueness, right? Like for example, if you're the net, you'd be the status quo is really good. We shouldn't try to do anything. We shouldn't change anything about the status quo. Don't take any actions to risk changing it because it's so good. Or if you're on the app, right? Like the squo is super duper bad. Like you should be trying anything you can to try and change this. Like the only risk of solving this problem is in the app. So that's where like you can weigh like uniqueness, right? Second is clarity of link. It's kind of like it's not really real weighing. It's but you can use this, right? Like we explained our link more. Theirs obviously is very bad. It's very sketchy. They didn't explain it. Don't buy it. Third is on probability. You know, like my probability of my link is higher than their probability. Like for example, the probability of climate change causing extinction is a lot higher than like some random nuclear war between like I don't know, North Korea and South Korea or something, right? Fourth is historical precedent. Like there's already historical precedent of climate change causing like irreversible damage, like, you know, natural disasters and stuff. And we can literally see global warming like shoot up and like crops are dying and stuff. But like we haven't really seen nuke war to the extent where there's a risk of extinction or even like a risk of like nuclear winter, right? So like the historical precedent for my extinction is higher. And there's like a lot of other ways that you can like do link weighing because no one really says like, oh, this is exactly how you have to do it. But these are just some starting ideas. Okay. Now finally, let's end off with the weighing formula. So this is how you should be doing weighing to get like every single, like to hit every single bullet for like real weighing, right? So first you need your argument. You need to explain your argument or at least your impact and like your link chain into it. And you have to say what weighing mechanism you're winning, right? Like for example, my impact of 900 million people being pushed into poverty wins on magnitude, and then you have to link it into why you win the weighing mechanism. So if I'm doing magnitude, like because 900 million is bigger than 100 million people, and the reason why magnitude matters more than probability, or like poverty matters more than, you know, I don't know, a recession is because of XYZ. So then you want to do the weighing mechanisms and the meta weighing. And like not even just like weighing, like you like meta weighing is probably like actually the fifth step, but the fourth step is more like why does winning this weighing mechanism matter, right? Like why does it matter that you're winning on time frame? Because your impact happens first, right? So why does your impact happening first matter? You have to say like, okay, because this means there's like because right now people are dying, but like if we have 10 years to solve for climate change, there's other ways that we can solve for it. But right now we should prioritize the people who are already dying, who have no other solutions, right? So that's where you explain why you're winning, why the weighing mechanism matters. And then the fifth step would probably be like meta weighing, which is like, why does your mechanism matter more than theirs? And you might not always have to do like meta weighing if you don't have time, but also because like most of your opponents probably won't be doing weighing at all, right? Like they'll just be like, I'm winning my case. And then you can be like, okay, but like I like if you look to my weighing, like I'm obviously winning the round. But it's always good to say like some sort of meta weighing, like say prefer reversibility first, right? And like especially if they don't like say anything, like maybe they're weighing and you're weighing, but you say prefer like reversibility first. Like you, or even if they're not weighing, you can say prefer probability over magnitude, and then you have like the chance to explain it in later speeches, but the judge is going to look at probability first because you like obviously you said it first, right? And if they need warrants, the warrants can come in later speeches. Okay. And then extending weighing in later speeches, it's just like explain the weighing mechanism, why you win again, right? And like the most important thing is like don't just like repeat yourself. Like obviously if you're, for example, starting weighing in like magnitude weighing in rebuttal, it's kind of annoying to just hear like I'm winning on magnitude 800 over 400, 800 over 400, and you just say that in like every speech, right? You want to do bigger implications on your impacts and like weigh in different ways, but also build upon your analysis in each speech, right? Like, okay, not only do I win on magnitude, but I'm also winning on time frame. Or you can be like, okay, I'm winning on poverty, and poverty outweighs their impact of a war, because poverty is the root cause of war. So that, and it's the root cause of terrorism, and it's the root cause of everything. Like literally someone did this to me in their round, right? Like we were winning a nuclear war and they were winning like poverty, but then they were like, poverty is the root cause of war and terrorism and everything. It is the root cause of all things bad. So you should prefer like poverty first, and then they won the round, right? So you can always implicate your impact to impact into different, like even more impacts. I personally think weighing should start in rebuttal, which is like first rebuttal, right? Like when you're weighing your turns against their case, like, oh, my turn on, like for example, if you read like a link turn, like no, their link doesn't cause, like no, they don't cause profits to go down. They actually cause profits to go up, and that's bad because of like XYZ, and you're preferring my turn on probability because blah blah blah, right? And you can always do the weighing at like the bottom of your rebuttals, like saying, but even if we just look at like taking the impacts at face value, you prefer my magnitude over their magnitude. You can start weighing in like summary. Final focus is a bit late, but if like the other team doesn't weigh either, it doesn't really matter. And like for lay judges, they like weighing isn't really, I don't know. I don't think it's like super convincing for them if you use like the buzzwords like reversibility and stuff, right? But like if you explain it in like a simple way, like say explaining why like extinction matters more than, poverty, like even if the probability is small, and but if you explain it in a good way, I think it would be convincing too. Weighing is like probably more important in like more techy circuits. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?